So just to say welcome again to everybody for joining us, and thank you for this session of Empowering Women in Public Space. We'll be starting off just with the introductions and then going into the panel discussion. And then we will be hoping towards the end to have a Q&A that everyone can interact and join us and exchange with any questions that either you have in the chat or that you're welcome to join us on screen, of course, to ask the questions. And the idea of empowering women in public space and inviting Sally Kneeshaw, our gender expert from URBACT, and also Luisa Bravo, who will be, of course, co-hosting this event from City Space Architecture. We'll be having Rosie Romero joining us probably in about 10 minutes or so. And also Evelien Verschroeven, who's going to be joining us out something quite, we wanted to bring a bit of creativity, let's say. So Evely's going to be our resident artist this evening, and she'll also be drawing and painting, because we've been sharing some of her amazing images on within the group. So that's the plan, but I want to explain a little bit about empowering women in public space. I started this initiative with a few women during this COVID period, and it was initiated because, of course, there's been a lot in the press, of course, about gender violence. We'd also had some cases here in Brussels, which got a lot of publicity. There was a case in the UK with Sarah Everard, who had been murdered, in fact, by a policeman. And that also encouraged me to organise a vigil here. But also I wanted to connect with women internationally. So I'd reached out to some women that also do martial arts. I used to do martial arts in a past life. And I'm not saying that's the answer to, of course, having safer public spaces, but it was about empowering women. So we reached out to Diana Trang, who's a martial arts expert in Northern America. There was Kalsoum Hazara, who's based in South Asia. There's also Laska Nenova, who's based in Bulgaria. And so we wanted to really start this initiative, and also as well as advocating for kind of, you know, taking up self-defense for women and girls, but also how can we advocate for safer public spaces? And what does that mean? The bigger conversation about gender equal spaces, but also looking at different aspects of inclusion, looking at how can we have more women in policy-making decisions? How can we also think about inclusion in a bigger way of thinking about Black and ethnic minority women, more women in policy-making decisions? And it brought me to looking at a few stats also on women in architecture and urbanism. And in the UK, for example, there's 1% of women that are Black that are in architecture, registered with Royal Institute of British Architects. Don't know the statistics in Europe. We have 560,000 architects. There's about 40-something% are women. Don't know what the breakdown of that is. But thinking of how can we stir some conversation and debate around this? So that's the purpose of this chat. And I'll pass it on to Luisa, who will be co-hosting with me this evening, and we'll be then following into the questions.
Thank you, Rozina. While I'm introducing myself, I see some others are joining this meeting because we have more than 20 registered attendees, so I guess they will join while we speak. So I'm glad to join this very interesting talk series on women and public space with City Space Architecture, which is a non-profit organization based in Italy, and we work on public space culture, promoting public space culture. So it is extremely important to address gender issues when we talk about public space. We work on public space not just from a design perspective, but also in terms of how it is lived, how it is appropriated, how can generate inclusion or exclusions and conflicts we try to have to bring critical understanding on the complexity of public space in the contemporary dimension. We live in a multicultural society, intergenerational society, so public space is more and more about accessibility, equity, democracy, and we have experienced a lot of these issues, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're still actually living this condition of being inside for most of the times, like now we are all connected, sitting at our desks and living public space from a distance, also because of the pandemic. Public space is now also about safety and health. Now more than ever we understand why public space matters and why public space is so important for the functioning of our cities and societies. When we talk about public space in general, we always refer to well-designed and well-maintained public space, but who is in charge of designing and maintaining? Who are the owners of public space? Because we are experiencing a lot of privatization trends in the last decades, and also the governance related to urban issues is not including the public space as a top priority in their own agenda. So I think it is very important today that I see many women here, but this meeting is open to men as well. So, because you know, supporting gender issues related to public space is something that belongs to the society as a whole, not just to women. So it is important that we also understand how to actually engage men in the conversation related to women in general, and specifically women in public space. So I think that this is enough from my side, just to give an introduction to city space architecture, and then I can post in the chat some references to websites if you want to explore more about what we do. And I would like to start, if it's okay for you, Rozina, following your draft. I would like to start the conversation by inviting our speakers today. Maybe each speaker can introduce herself briefly, so that we know more about you. So we have Sally. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yes. Thank you, Luisa, and thank you, Rozina, for inviting me this evening to this discussion group. I'm a London-based public policy consultant. I work mostly with URBACT, which is the European Exchange and Learning Programme for Cities. So my specialism is urban policy and how that intersects with gender equality. And I've done some work in the last couple of years and produced a report called Gender Equal Cities. So my perspective is really about cities more globally, including public space. And we work with local authorities. So it's about encouraging and looking for good examples in public administrations at local level of how to promote gender equality across all sorts of aspects of civic life. So mobility, service provision, education, budgeting, mainstreaming in communications, lots of different elements to it. But I think public space is something that people have become a lot more aware of. Like you said, Luisa, during the pandemic, but also generally, I think the whole debate around how accessible, welcoming, friendly public space is for women, but not just for women, actually, women, girls, and other groups who might feel marginalized or not comfortable in public spaces. So I'm really happy to be here and to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. We are waiting for Rozina, that I think she will join soon. We also
She will join in about 10 minutes or so, but I think also it would be lovely just to do a quick intro with Evelien as well.
Yes, I was about to ask Evelien to take the floor.
Okay, hello everybody, I'm Evelien. Normally I'm working more in education ethic environments, but as a hobby I draw a lot, and I use a lot of technologies and these and techniques, drawing with blister, with ink, with pencils. But this evening I will try to draw on my tablet. I'm working with photographs that I take on the screen, and then because it's really difficult when somebody is moving all the time to draw it. So I will try that. It's a challenge. It's the first time I do it, so I hope it will go well. And why I said that I would like to do that is because I think it's really important, and I support the empowering women in public spaces, and I think it's important to communicate that. And I try also always to put some emotions in my drawings, and I hope I can do that also well this evening. So I'm really glad to be here and also interested in the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelien. So I'm now asking the first question that Rozina kindly wrote for me to address this audience. How the impact of COVID-19 has affected women, and how can we create the change we need, or influence the way of moving forward into a post-after COVID city, both at individual and city level. I would like here to mention, I don't know if you have heard about this petition, half of it, that was launched at the EU level and was already signed by more than 4,000, mostly women. And this is a demand for half of the Corona funds for women, since women were really very much affected during the pandemic. Many lost their jobs, and many others had to take care of family and issues related to also care of vulnerable members of the family, and taking care of kids, staying at home for all teaching activities. So I mean, we all had these kind of difficult situations on different conditions, because of course COVID affected in many different ways different countries and different locations. But I think now that we are all experiencing the recovery period, we can try to start strategizing somehow how we can actually have an impact, how we can influence the decision-making process, and how we can contribute for future actions. I will post in the chat also the link to the petition I was mentioning, half of it. Okay, so maybe Sally, you want to answer?
Sure. I mean, Luisa, you've started to talk about the impacts, and there's quite a lot of research now about the impacts on women through the pandemic, and especially economic. More women losing their jobs because women tend to have more part-time work in sectors that have shrunk, and there's a danger that those jobs won't come back as quickly as men's jobs. We've seen that from previous economic crises, that the effects for women are longer lasting in terms of job recovery and job sustainability. And the sectors that we see the investment going into in the recovery funds are things like infrastructure, city, infrastructure projects, and digital, which are male-dominated sectors. So there's a danger that the gender pay gap will get bigger if we're not careful, or reduce even at an even slower rate, because it's painfully slow the way that rate is evening out anyway. So I think the economic impact is an important one. You mentioned as well the care burden, which seemed to fall disproportionately on women in terms of homeschooling children, looking after other family members, and that also has an impact on women's productivity, on their job promotion prospects. So there's a whole economic sphere. And I think the other one that's important to mention that's totally related to the public space debate is about safety, that there was a spike in domestic violence during the pandemic, that women were disconnected from their regular support networks by being in lockdown. So when we're coming out and into recovery now, I think what you've mentioned is really important about gender budgeting at every level. So the Recovery and Resilience Fund at European level, it's 672 billion euros. It's a huge amount of money that's being poured into the recovery. That's on top of the multi-annual framework at EU level. And there is some level of political commitment to gender mainstream that, to gender budget it, to know where that money is going. But we need to hold, for me, the personal issue is we need to hold account our city administrations, our national administrations, to know how that, to have the data. How is that money being spent? How can women benefit from these recovery funds to make up some of those gaps? And I heard a good example today from a city in Sweden that had decided to reallocate resources to the care sector, having seen how that had held everybody together, a lot of women in low-paid jobs. So they're reallocating resources to that sector. And these kind of initiatives where we think about how we spend money, the city, how it spends money, where its money goes, and making sure that women are benefiting from that. I see it also here with things like business recovery funds. We need to be collecting on data on the business recovery funds that are going out to businesses, to the furlough. I think there's quite a lot of data on furlough. Is it going to women equally to men? This is our taxpayers' money as much as anything, as sort of a justice piece in the economic part of it. And then in terms of green space and public space, there's going to be quite a lot of potential changes in cities, as architects would know. Commercial space is losing value. People are working, the work patterns will be different, work geography is likely to be different. People are not using public transport. So there's lots of shifts for cities to have to deal with. And I think from a city level, what we're trying to encourage is all of this complexity needs to be dealt with as a whole. Because if you just tackle one thing at once piecemeal, it's not going to work. You have to really think about how all of these things fit together and bring gender and equality and equity right into the middle of all of your policy making. And the way to do that is obviously through awareness, but also through us as women who are active in this conversation, talking, lobbying, being, holding to account the people who are developing these recovery plans. And a good question is, do you know if your city has a recovery plan? And if it does, are you talking to the people who are developing that plan and saying, how are you going to tell us where these funds are being spent and what the priorities will be going forward?
I just want to say, Sally, you've just come out of the OurBACT, of course, conference over the last couple of days. What was the kind of feedback from there, and was it obviously on the agenda? I'm sure it was, of course, with you being.
Yeah, we had one particular session on gender and procurement, actually, which is a really underused tool. So public procurement, which is a large part of GDP, how public authorities spend money. And there are various ways in which you can make sure that gender gets incorporated into clauses. It's a bit technical and dry, and people are a bit afraid of it. But it's one of those things that is underused. So we talked quite a bit about that. And we had a session this morning on Building Back Better, this slogan that's being used by everybody, including the G7 leaders last week, who said they were putting equality and climate emergency at the center of their plans. And we decided that, we don't want to build back. We want to build actually in a different direction. So let's not go back. And what does better mean? And it was a good conversation about actually how we connect the equity and the climate emergency issues, which can be, thinking all the time about sustainable mobility. In fact, women move around a city in more sustainable ways than men. That's the data on that anyway. So how do we encourage more cycling, walking, giving up, taking cars, reclaiming public space? And as Luisa said, designing and managing that space in a way that's more welcoming and accessible. So I think in general, there was quite a lot of optimism that the post-pandemic phase gives us an opportunity to do things differently, but it's very easy to default to doing things in business as usual way. So we have to be alert to that and to try to really think about connecting gender.
Oh, I don't know if we've lost you, Sally, or is that just me?
No, I got muted, but I'm off mute again now. So yeah, I think there was optimism. We talked a bit about the different scale of cities. Maybe it's easier for larger cities to do this than smaller ones. Smaller cities generally have less capacity than the bigger ones, but I think it's up to us to raise voices, women's voices, to get the representation that you talked about. Although I have to say, representation doesn't always give us the right answers. It's really important to have equal representation, but it also, I think women's lobbies are really important in this. And I was just recently in a meeting about actually the meetings about procurement, and in they'd done a sort of heat map of European countries that were providing really good conditions for gender to be involved, included in procurement. And Spain was coming out the best. And part of the reason for that was the women's lobby is very strong in Spain, and the women's lobby is a very strong partner at regional and local government level. They're recognized as a partner, and that just shows the strength when we bring our voices, and our voices are included as equal partners around the policy table.
Yes, can I say something? Sorry, Rozina. Yes, actually, I agree with you, Sally. Lobbying is very important, and I've been in touch with several groups that are advocating for women participation in major decision-making tables, let's say, at the UN level, because with City Space Architecture, we are partners of UN Habitat, and so I'm often part of this high-level multi-stakeholders meeting. And I see that there is actually a strong interest in different groups that are led by women, in order to actually be involved in this discussion, and always highlight the importance of including in reports, documents, these gender issues. And they've been very active in actually being invited also to have special sessions or part of large groups to raise the issues from women perspective. But I think this is still not enough, and we have to always encourage women at various levels to actually expand their capacity and willingness to say something, to speak up, and to actually reclaim their own rights to be part of the agenda somehow.
Yeah, I just want to second that as well with everything that Luisa said. We've had many a discussion about this, even recently, about saying, you know, how can we create more of an impact with collaboration and thinking a little bit more long term, and, you know, being aware of course, some of the initiatives out there, like Her City Tools, which a UN Habitat had launched during COVID period, and, you know, a few other ones, of course. And I think, just like Luisa said, there's room to do a lot more and create more space for these discussions. And also, you know, I think, Sally, you and I had met, of course, also a couple of years ago there, when it was the Eurocities female mayors panel discussion, which was also very interesting to look at the different aspects of female leadership, which of course we've heard a lot about again during the COVID period. If we look to New Zealand and think about the well-being economy and this more strong but empathetic sort of leadership. Just wondered, you know, what kind of thoughts you had on that as well, Sally?
I think representation and leadership are really important, and they're key at local level. And I think one of our stats is that at European level, 16% of city leaders are female, are women. It's just really low. I mean, there are more women councillors, and it varies across Europe. And this is where there's a whole debate about quotas. The countries where there are quotas, either in the party political system or in the national or regional system, have a much better representation of women, France and Spain being good examples. And in other parts of Europe, it's really bad in terms of how many women, and it links to what you were saying about women's confidence, women's voices, women being given or taking the space to be heard across Europe. So I think leadership's important. I'm always have a slightly worried because we also have examples of women leaders who are not feminist and who are not necessarily going to be representing the needs of women all the time. And we have some great men leaders who are brilliant feminists. You know, I think we need to be nuanced in our attitude towards leadership. And also remember, we're not just representing the type of women we are. You know, for me, an older white woman, it's really important that we use informal representation methods to bring in, to be always thinking, who's not here? Who am I not listening to? Which are the other groups that are nowhere to be heard? Like undocumented women, you know, trans people. You know, what's their experience of moving around public space like, and how do we learn more about that? So I think that's all really important. And I just wanted to talk a bit about what Luisa mentioned too. And I think when we have these conversations in a group like this, where we're pretty all on board and we're talking to people, and it's really important because this is how we have our support networks, and we learn and we exchange. But having these conversations in the rooms where people are not on board is really important too, and how we frame the conversations. Like, I think you mentioned that, Luisa. If you talk about gender equality, you have a self-selecting group that will come to it, and a lot of people who won't come to it, you know, who won't come to that session. So how we frame what we're talking about is really important. And we had a really interesting conversation this morning with a Swedish colleague saying, for them, gender equality is not about women's rights. It's about making sure that the priorities and needs of women and men are treated equally. They've sort of moved away in the way that they frame the discussion, and that's very Swedish. And you know, and then you talk to other cities and say, can we think about the way that we talk about this? And the UN now call it generation equality. You know, they've called it generation equality rather than a women or girls campaign. So how we even frame the debate, I think, depends a bit who we're talking to, but if we want to be talking to the people who need to hear this, we maybe have to talk about it in a different way sometimes. And the question, when you do that, the thing I like the most is when people, especially men, but sometimes women say, I've never thought of that before. And that's like, for me, the best result you can get when you have these conversations about how cities are designed by men, public spaces, give examples about what changes could be made to public space to make the whole issue about toilets, you know, and people say, I've never thought about that. And you think, yeah, we need to be having, that's the kind of reaction you want in a group whose job also, a lot of these people, their jobs are the ones that dictate the way our public space looks like, whether it's planners, architects, a lot in tech, actually, tech companies who are doing the AI around sensors in cities and smart cities, talking to them about your coding. You know, coding isn't neutral. Everything, what goes into the coding will affect what the results that come out of it. So we've got a lot of work to do to keep these conversations alive and going, I think. But and I've got away from the question about leadership, sorry. I was just answering some of the other questions that you're talking about. I think we've, you know, there's a sort of formal and informal representation of leadership, but also understanding that having more women around the table isn't always going to get a better result, often does, but isn't always, but at least you're going to have a woman's experience around that table, which she's got a different body. Like for a start, you know, our bodies are different from men's bodies, they're different size, they do different things, and that seems so taboo sometimes to even raise those things, but they're important. So yeah, I think leadership is important, and women should be allowed to do things. I guess when women get into certain leadership positions, it's quite difficult to do things differently. But to be brave enough and to be given enough space to say, actually, I don't like the way this meeting's going, let's do it differently. or I want to be a different kind of leader, a different kind of politician, a different kind of person in this room. And that's not, we all know that's not so easy when we're, the norms are not that way. We live in the patriarchy as well. We've grown up in the patriarchy, so that's in us in a lot of ways too. But I'll throw it open to, I'd love to hear what other people think about all of this too.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sally. Yeah, good idea. I think it's great to open it up. I see that Lubna Mustafa is here, whom I know from the Amakan placemaking over in the Middle East. I'm part of that group as well. Lubna, any thoughts at all? Lovely for you to join us, and it would be great to hear a little bit about what you do and also your thoughts on the topic.
Hello, Rozina and everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me over. I'll try to talk for short because my voice now would be very noisy. I am infected by flu for the past week, and it's affecting me. However, it's really very interesting topic when listening to all of you, because the perspective from here in the Middle East is kind of different. It's different actually in multi levels. First of all, for me as a person working on ground with people, it's better to get women rights recognized by male, not only by feminists, or actually it's better not from feminists, so you can really help them. Because if you are going to get the help here or to get the support from the feminist perspective, because of the local culture in most of the countries, you will find yourself confronting malehood, which is not at the end in the best interest of women's rights. So from my perspective and from my practices, actually, getting women needs and preferences recognized from their own males in the society is much better than working alone as a female. This is one thing. So when you are talking about the stakeholders, actually having male with us, sitting in the same table, discussing what are the women needs, is a part of the solution, is a big part of the solution. The other thing actually is regarding women needs in public spaces, of course, because this is our topic today. We can't list this under this title and make a generalized ideas or thought for all women, because we have to recognize the culture background, we have to recognize the community layer, and from which one this woman is standing out or speaking, because it's really very different from rural areas, small towns to big cities. It's totally different. And there is another factor which wasn't mentioned actually previously today, and it makes a big difference here in the Middle East, which is the motherhood. Because whenever you are speaking about women here, you have to recognize that most of them are mothers. And this is affecting their needs and their preferences in public spaces, whether in the design or in the physical needs. For example, if you are going to have a community survey measuring women interest or women tendency to use public spaces, you will find most of their preferences are linked to safety and availability of playgrounds, availability to nearby toilets, which all of them are linked to having a baby. This is one thing. I have visited many European countries and many countries in the Far East, and I have noticed that even the material used in public spaces, like the bathing, it will not be preferred here because of the weather as well. This is another thing. It's really interesting listening to all of you. I think all of you are living in Europe. it's really interesting to know how much different it makes from moving from a region, a world region, to another one. The culture, the environment, mostly the community traditions and thoughts are affecting the public spaces in a big way, actually. One of the guest speakers talked about the COVID-19 and how it affected the use of public spaces. Actually, it's very different here, because whenever you are talking about the use of public space for economic reason, you will find it is the same use despite the COVID-19, because we have here, when I'm saying here, maybe I am talking more about Egypt and around countries, because this is where I had previous work or previous experience or surveys. The women who are going for the public space for economic reason, like for selling something or having some activity for with price, they had to go because they are supporting their families. And there is a big percentage of women who are either participating in supporting their families financially, or they are the main supporter, the main sponsor for the family. So they had to go out despite the COVID-19. But whenever there is a lockdown, like having a penalty or you have to pay for breaking the lockdown, then they had to stay at home. And it was nice that some of the NGOs supported these families during the lockdown and during the COVID-19. After the COVID-19, from my personal observation and from one survey I am working on it now, I didn't find that much change in the pattern of using public space. And this is because of the culture aspect as well. Hello? Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes. What happened?
Yes.
You were muted at some point.
Yes, because before COVID-19, it's very common here that you find families are staying apart from each other because of the privacy factor. So after COVID-19, they didn't had to do any more. Can you understand me? So we don't have that much obligation after COVID-19, because privacy working here as if it is measurements, but it was for culture reasons. I can't say the same for the cost, because it's very different from the cost from the seafront, because you will find people there sitting by each other. And
thank you, Lobna. Sorry, we would like to give the floor to other speakers joining this meeting today.
Thank you very much for sharing with you.
Yes, thank you for sharing your thoughts and experience. I know Middle East and it's difficult. It's difficult area for this topic. We would like to have now Rosia from Brazil, right? And maybe we can invite later also Anna from Ecuador. So we have a perspective from South America.
Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Rozina and Luisa. Well, I have worked during the last 4 years as an urban planner in a small city in the metropolitan area of the capital city where I live in, is in the state of Paraíba in Brazil. So I think we should really bring this discussion to small towns, because we have there during these 4 years, we were working with a very nice leadership. So we have a mayor, a woman mayor. She was very forward thinking. So we could, during the last 4 years, we could implement a lot of actions. I can make a list for you of over 20 or 25 gender actions based on gender and on public space. And I think we also brought this to communities, and to small communities and to traditional communities. So to Black women, to Indigenous women. So empowering these groups were like, I have seen that in the 4 years, a group of women, Indigenous women empowered. So they built their own place again to receive visitors, and then also make to start making sustainable tourism, so receiving guests and also participating in the economic circle of the city, because before they were excluded for not having a little bit of push from the government. We didn't need to do so much, but they already had everything. They just needed guidance and some help from us with the territorial perspective, and from other secretaries also, tourism, well-being, health. So we're supportive in that way. So, and also the African descendant communities we have from enslaved, we call in Brazil the quilombos. So also we managed to empower a group. So they make bakery now, and and they sell to the capital, they sell to other cities, and they started very small. So I would like to bring this to give attention to these small groups, also street vendors. I think the Lubna brought this. So to bring a little attention, because in the capitals, women in capitals, I feel they are more aware of this, and also architects and policymakers, they are more aware of this. But when we come to small towns, we don't have technicians that are aware, or technicians that are feminists. We were the first feminists to arrive and work with gender planning or gender women urban planning, like women-based urban planning on this town in 56 years. So it was great. Unfortunately, she was not re-elected. So because we are in a very difficult political time in Brazil, another woman was re-elected, but she's not feminist. So what was done on the 4 years could not be continued right now. But yeah, that's what I had to share for now. I was a bit nervous, but it was nice to be here with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anna, would you like to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Luisa, and thank you, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be here. I'm in Ecuador. I'm located in Quito, in the capital, Rozina, not in the small city. Basically, what I've been thinking of the presence of women in public space in Latin America is quite tough, not only because of the pandemic, but it has been strengthened after the pandemic. Here, the workforce population is around 60% in informality, and most of it happens in the public space, and most of them is done by women. But it's also the place where women are more insecure. They're being attacked by people. They've been, I don't know, it's very tough here. So informality and women in public space is one of the biggest topics we are facing here. Unfortunately, not much is being done because there are like bigger problems for the country or for the government. I don't know, especially in the economic sense, not in health mainly, but in the macroeconomics. So what has been happening here is that not only women, but small groups in locations, in neighborhoods, in close to plazas, they've been built as a collective. So they have been joining together to make this kind of collective in the public space. But it is just like an exception. It doesn't usually happen that way. So insecurity, danger, the amount of time they spend there is more than at home, or if they have a house. And also at home, what they hear, I don't know, but I think it's very, very often what happens. In their houses, maybe there's the place they feel that it's the most dangerous place for them also, because there's a big cause of domestic violence here. So there are many things that are happening right now. There are more and more people on the streets. There are more and more people bringing the informal economy to their houses, to their families, and it's mainly done by women. So I'm very focused on that. I've been following some work with some neighborhoods, with some organizations. But as I said, unfortunately, the local government is not facing this, is not addressing this problem or this situation. I don't think it's a problem because we are informal. Traditionally, Latins, we are very informal. We occupy the public space in a very informal way, but they are not facing this quite, I don't know, they don't see the importance that it has right now. So yeah, Sally, I don't know, you want to say something?
Yes, please, Sally.
Thanks. I just wanted to say it was so nice to hear those contributions from Lubna, Rice and Anna, to hear from different parts of the globe. And you're completely right. It's so culturally specific, a lot of this work, both in terms of the way things happen, the economy, demography, and our solutions have to be tailored to that and have to be bottom up or they're not going to work, definitely. But I'm so happy when Rice said there were lots of things that happened when a feminist mayor came to power. It's so encouraging to hear that. Really nice. I'd love to hear more about that. And I guess a few things in reaction. One was, I think there's a real danger from what Anna said, that there's this is perceived to be a little problem and bigger problems are more important. I think that's something we have to challenge all the time, that actually dealing with gender equality, you might solve some of the bigger problems as well. You know, it's a way to solving bigger problems. We should never accept that our problems are not part of the big problems, or there's bigger problems that, you know, I don't know. I think gender equality needs to be at the center of the bigger problems too. So it's not either or kind of thing. Secondly, I think there's lots of really good tools and practice that we can all learn from, things like the UN toolkit that Rozina mentioned. There are lots of work, you know, there's lots, I think we know the answers. A lot of the time we know what the answers are. It's just getting people to do them, getting the political will, getting the sort of momentum going to actually implement these things, because the solutions are there and we've seen them when they get put into practice, and we've got proof of concept a lot of the time too. So it's about pushing we don't have to reinvent anything. We know a lot of the answers, I think. And that relates to the idea of inclusive design. A lot of in public space, a lot of the design solutions are related to inclusive design, which is better for everybody. So that means it doesn't get set up as a problem between men and women, or we have a conflict. Actually, when you look at well-designed places and inclusive design places, they're better for everybody: men, women, older people, younger people, families. You know, so it takes away that kind of idea that it's antagonistic, that we have to have a battle between the sexes to create great places. And places like, you know, Vienna has got fantastic examples. Other cities have done this, and you can see it can be done. It's not so difficult, and we know what the design principles are, and even the practical things, we know what they are that need to be done. It's just a question of us doing it. And that related to that, my last point was about tactical urbanism. And I think this is a good moment now, as we come out of recovery, to just do it. Get community groups to just take over that space and just do it in as much as we can, because I don't think people will stop you. I mean, I think there was a very good point in our conference this week that if local government doesn't find the solutions to these issues, the market will. And the market solutions are not going to be as good as the sort of civil society bottom-up solutions. So it's up to us to kind of work with cities and do it ourselves, and just ask for forgiveness, not for permission. I really like that expression. You know, just do it and then see what happens afterwards, because for the most part, a lot of it will be welcomed, I think, those kind of actions. So this is a great debate. I'm really enjoying it. And I'll put some things in the chat as well about links to good tools. Thanks.
Thank you, Sally. Yes, it's a great discussion, actually. And I see that we have very nice attendees here. So I would like to give the floor to Katya, if you're interested to say something.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I'm both Mexican and Belgian. Sorry for my dog, but he's so excited about having you guys here. So just allow him. And he's a rescue dog, so his manners are still a little bit limited. No, well, my experience after having all these having spent all these years in Belgium, where I think that there are so many debates on gender topics, and also about having had the opportunity to attend all the feminist days or debates at the parliament. That was a very enriching experience. I can say that my experience in the last 2 years spent here in Mexico, particularly in the city of Querétaro, which is for Latin American standards, a very privileged city in which there's a lot of investment and development, is that it's difficult for me to talk about this, especially in a country in which there's so much violence towards women and that is so normalized. I think that the way that Latino American gender-related topics has evolved is very different from not even country to country, but region to region. And in my region, I think that there's it's like a volcano that has been slept for a long time, now is evolving, and that people are realizing that there's not only a matter of just talking about it, but also about designing the proper spaces. It's a very difficult battle because in my case, I own a co-working here and I'm trying to do conversatories on the topic, but not talking directly about gender because that creates a lot of intimidation and even alienation in people, but just about working together properly. I have had a good response from especially architects, female architects who want to talk about how to create better spaces. In my case, I also don't like to only be surrounded around women. I think that it's very important to talk about gender topics to everyone and to also have male allies, if you can call it that way, because if not, and that's a very personal point of view, you create exclusion, and that's not something I would like to be part of. I think that also something interesting is the evolution of Internet of Everything, formerly called Internet of Things. That's something that is more evolved in Europe. It's about just putting nodes that gather information around the cities, and that can also create some advantages in the topic of gender. As I said, that's more evolved in Europe, but still it's not super evolved. I know this because I'm working in some project for my city to become a pilot on that with a former customer of a job I had in Belgium. So my point here is, how can we see all this architecture, not only in terms of the buildings, but also of the information flows? Because that's where at least Europe is more evolved. And I think that there's an interest of people working in this topic in Europe to also see how it works in other regions in which they can do more testing. Why? Because from a legislation point of view, they have more freedom. So I think it's something interesting to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Katia. Yes, very interesting point. Now I think we can move to Indonesia, to Widiani. Sorry, how do I pronounce your name?
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, Luisa. Yes, hi everyone. I'm Widiani from, you can call me just Widi, from Indonesia. I stay in Bandung, and I'm a lecturer at the ITB, the eldest university in Indonesia in architecture department. Well, for me, yeah, perhaps we don't really think about gender in reality when the government create the public space, but we do a lot of requirement when students want to create a public space. So I think there is, I don't remember who wrote the requirement for public space. Yes, we always follow step by step, or the what must be done in a public space. However, perhaps we looks like people in Egypt, where if you're a woman alone going to the public park, it's not that that safe. You don't feel safe there, because yeah, I just started to think, do I want to go to a public space alone? Yeah, it's very rare that you can see a female sitting in the public space, unless they are homeless people. But if you're gathered together, like some females, or you go with friends, then you are brave enough to, you feel safer than if you are alone. That's what happens. But I was thinking now, what is the reason, or what are the reasons? But yeah, I will search for that. Sorry, I cannot saying that much about the gender here, but it's nice to hear all of you talking about empowering women in the public space. Thank you.
Thank you, Viviane. And if there is any other woman here attending this meeting who would like to say or to add some comments, we are happy to take your perspective in this discussion.
Maybe I can speak if you allow.
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, good, thank you. Sorry if you hear my a little bit of noise, but it's super hot here, so I have to deal with the sound. But I hope that you hear me well.
Yes, so we can hear you well. Where are you from?
So I'm Portuguese, but I'm currently in Belgium, in Brussels, working at Women in Urbanism. I have the pleasure to have known already Rozina, because she was part in one of our events, which we are having this month, really about hearing the voices of women. So it's really great to see all these different perspectives and experiences from all these different countries, and that I didn't even know about. So I only have the experience, as already someone mentioned, in an European country, which is so different than in the other countries. But at the same time, sometimes we see that the same problems are everywhere else in the world. So there are some local problems, so that's very true, but there's also some global problems. And this is something that we also want to do. But what we are doing also now, it's more in Belgium, trying to understand the problems in a local level. But then I think in some part of this, we need actually to think bigger. And okay, we take examples of different cities, of very specific cities, try to see how we can use that into different other cities that have also the same problem, and then also look locally again. So I also, if possible, I would like to invite you for our session that we'll have this month, and also we already have some recorded. Right now they are in 3 different languages, because Brussels is a mess as a language speaking. So it's English, French, and Dutch. I unfortunately don't know Dutch, so that part I still don't know, but we will have subtitles and it will be available for all, because we want really to include everyone in these conversations. And yes, and I really enjoyed it, hearing all these different backgrounds that I really didn't know. So I really want to encourage everyone to continue and to really make this change, because we need, and we are on the way to do it. So we just need to continue.
Thank you, Raquel. Yes, we will continue, of course. Anyone else?
Just wondering if anyone else that we've not heard from at all. Maybe, I don't know if Laura or Carolina or anybody wants to contribute anything before we kind of have the summary and close up.
Yeah, well, I don't mind making a comment. Well, I don't really have, so I'm currently studying for my master's in town planning, so I don't really have much experience in this policy and leadership and everything, but my master's project is actually about women's safety in the built environment, so it's really interesting for me to hear about all your experiences and just ideas towards all of this. So I'm mostly learning and listening, but it's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Maybe I can say a quick word then just before passing on to maybe Sally for the last word, and then Luisa, you do a quick summary. I just want to say thank you, of course, for everyone for coming along. It's really been a pleasure to listen to you all. And I also give a quick plug to a wonderful initiative here in Brussels of Women 100. We'll be overtaking public space on the 25th of June with 100 women who were active in COVID and 100 diverse women of Brussels region, and we are highlighting their cause of being active during COVID period. And also we'll have some events that weekend as well. So there's a lot of amazing initiatives that are happening, as you heard from also Raquel, and also OurBACT are doing amazing work. So just want to say, and of course, if you want to stay in touch, please do drop an email. My internet connection isn't very good, it's unstable, it's saying. So maybe we pass to Sally, then to Luisa for a closing.
Yeah, thanks, Rozina.
One thing I just have to quickly say, apologies from Rosie. She got totally caught up, and we had planned for Rosie to join us, so she sends her sincere apologies and she hopes to join us next time.
Thanks, Rozina, and thanks again for inviting me. I'd just like to say, actually, it's really inspiring and humbling to listen to you all in the different contexts around the world. And I think solidarity between women trying to create change is a really important thing, and this is a manifestation of it. There's lots of ways of doing it. This is a great way to do it. So kudos to Rozina and Luisa for bringing us together. It's really important. I think just I would encourage you to look at the Gender Equal Cities work that I've put in the chat. It is quite European, it's true. I mean, we're a European organization, but it's got kind of things to think about, all the different things you can think about as a city administration to promote gender equality, and some really good examples of really simple things that are happening in cities across Europe that do make a difference, that help women to feel comfortable, taking up space, taking up power. The way we're even the way that we are represented on advertising in the public space, which is important. Actually, banning sexist adverts is a really good thing to do. And thinking about the way, like, older women, how many older women do you see on pictures in public space and regular women's lives? So have a look at that. And I think the two things for me that we always stress are representation, both formal and informal. You know, with our voices being heard in different ways. And also intersectionality, that if we don't think about power in all of its dimensions and who's excluded from conversations, some women are, some women aren't, and just always be thinking in a more complex way about power and exclusion, not just as the Swedes say, it's always about gender, but never just about gender. I think that's a really good way to approach this, to make sure we're going the right way. So thank you so much for including me, and it's been lovely to meet you all.
Thank you very much, Sally. And so I guess now we are at the end of this meeting. I don't know if you want to say something, Rozina, also mentioning this initiative that you just put here in the chat.
Yeah, that's the one I'd mentioned about the Women 100, the one that's happening at the end of the month, where we're overtaking the public space and it's showcasing the 100 women active during COVID. So I just share that if anyone's interested, but everyone's free to share their initiatives, and really I think we want to encourage that, you know, the more the merrier. I give it back to you.
Yes, okay. Yes, there are actually several initiatives, as we said, that there are still several advocacy groups working on women power, women leadership, women representation in high-level positions, but I think there's still so much to say about women as a significant part of the conversation, and also in terms of public space, effective contribution for a more sensitive and more inclusive city and related public spaces as well. Sally mentioned about kind of universal design that we have to consider, and actually universal design is good also for children and older persons, so not just for women. And Sally also said if we design having women in mind, we actually design for all, and this is very true, especially for public space. And then we should encourage, as we heard from different people living in different countries and different conditions, we should encourage local governments to actually open up to this discussion. I'm thinking about, as we heard from South America, Indonesia, and I guess also India, because we have this issue also in India, but I guess this is the same issue that we have also in Europe. I mean, it's not so different. Probably is related to some specific areas or some specific social groups, but this kind of difficulties are happening also in our cities where we live in Europe, and there is so much to learn from other countries and other cities, as we were understanding from this discussion. How can we provide more opportunities for women to actually live and feel safe in the public sphere, but not just in the public sphere. I mean, in the society as a whole. I mean, to feel that they are contributing to the society as a whole, and that their voice is heard. I think is very important, and what I personally believe is that just by behaving as women who are looking for leadership, and doing our best to actually one step after another, we reach our goals, and we are proud of our achievements, and then we create some examples of many women all around the world doing their work every day, and trying to establish their own practice, their own professional activity, and themselves as a reference. So as soon as we will have more women that are able to empower themselves, so do not wait for others to empower you, just empower yourself, be brave, and make mistakes, fail, but please do something. Try to look for some success in your professional life, in your private life, because I think it is very important that we feel that we actually have the potential, all of us, to become what we want. I think this is the key of what we are looking for, and I don't like the idea that someone else is supposed to give me that power that I'm looking for. I'm able to actually use my power, and so I would like to reclaim my power. If some others think that I do not have it. I actually have it and I'm using it. I don't know if you have this same feeling, but you know, it's important also to be proud of who we are and what we do.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.
Yes, maybe, but this is my personal view. I don't know if you agree. I ended up, as I was saying to Rozina just a few days ago, I ended up in the last years to work with many women, not because I decided or I choose to do that, but only because now that I'm becoming older, I feel like I am closer to, you know, female sensitivity and way of thinking, which is something that you learn when you become mature, and that you probably do not really feel, at least when I was younger, I didn't feel so much the importance of you know, stress the fact that female women need to be really very well represented in the society, as Sally was mentioning. So maybe just a few comments just to wrap up this session, and then we say goodbye for the next talk.
Only if anyone wants to say anything, any last words?
Yes.
I just want to add that Evelien had, sorry, very quickly, Evelien apologised again. Her internet connection was not very good, but she's been drawing, and you know, we'll post on LinkedIn the thank you of the wonderful artwork that she'll do, as well as in who was next there? If nobody, then we wrap up.
Yes, yes, okay. So I hope with Rozina we are planning actually future activities together. We are trying to establish a long-term partnership on this topic, women and public space, with these talks, but also with presence in big events, pushing you know, the agenda on women perspective. And so we will get back to you by email if you do not mind, so that we will stay in touch later, and we will invite you to follow our activities and to join our events in the future.
Excellent. And thank you to you, Luisa, for the co-moderation, and thank you to everybody.
Thank you for
Thank you so much.
joining.
Have a good evening, everybody. Well, it's evening in London. Have a good day, wherever you are.
Thank you, Sally.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.